All right, so today we're diving into something pretty wild. We're going to be getting into Hubbard's brainwashing manual.
Yeah, this one is something else. And before we get too far into it, gotta say up front, we're here to break it down. Not to say we buy into any of this. Like we're looking at something potentially dangerous.
All right, definitely got to engage those critical thinking skills for this one. So this thing claims it's some leaked Russian textbook on something they call psychopolitics. Kind of sounds like a bad spy movie, right? It really does. And get this, they say psychopolitics is, and I quote, the art and science of asserting and maintaining dominion over the thoughts and loyalties of individuals, and the effecting of the conquest of enemy nations through mental healing.
Whoa, hold on. So they're saying this is like a guidebook to control minds, to gain political power. And it gets even wilder. They're claiming this is how Russia spreads communism, not by military force, but by like messing with people's minds. That's their claim, yeah. And it gets even more intense when they say these mental healing techniques or whatever you want to call them could be used on anyone, not just some enemy nation.
Okay, so anyone could be a target. That's a little creepy.
Yeah.
But to get how this document even works,
Yeah.
we got to get their logic right. And this is where it gets weird fast. This whole man is a machine thing.
This is where you see this very robotic view of people. Like we're just stimulus response machines, no free will, nothing.
So we're all just puppets.
Basically, according to them. And that right there, that's how they can justify doing all this messed up, manipulating, controlling what people believe, how they act. If people aren't really people, then it's not that different from programming a computer.
That is messed up. And this then leads to the really disturbing part, the methods of control they lay out.
Yeah, and they don't hold back. They've got everything from stuff that seems, I don't know, almost subtle, like degradation and defamation, basically. You just grind down someone's spirit, or even a whole country's with negativity.
So like a constant drip of negativity just wearing away at them until they doubt themselves.
Exactly. But then they go hardcore with things like pain drug hypnosis. PDH is what they call it. Drugs, pain, hypnosis, all to basically reprogram a person, implant new commands, even change who they're loyal to.
Hold on, this is straight out of some Cold War thriller. Are they serious with this?
Whether they actually did it, who knows? But in the manual, it's like this tool to totally rewrite who someone is, what they believe. And it gets worse. They even talk about electric shock. And get this, brain surgery.
Brain surgery. That's way beyond therapy. They're talking about cutting people's brains open to control them.
Sounds crazy, right? But that's what they're saying, using these invasive procedures to make people obey and erase any thought or behavior they don't like.
It's like straight out of a horror movie, messing with someone's brain like that. But it doesn't stop there, right? They talk about mental health institutions, organizations even. Like, what's the deal with that?
Yeah, they actually suggest going into these institutions, even taking them over, as a way to discredit anyone who disagrees with them, gain more power. It even gets into like using sex, blackmail, all that.
So using people's secrets, their weaknesses against them.
Cold. Yeah, it's cold-hearted. The ends justify the means, right? They don't care how awful it gets. And speaking of targets, they're pretty upfront about who they see as the biggest problem.
Who are they worried about?
Religion, big time. The way they see it, faith is bad because it tells people to think for themselves, believe in something bigger.
Which obviously goes against this whole psychopolitical control thing.
Exactly. They want total control over everything you think and do. And it's not just churches and stuff. Young people, they're a big one too.
Makes sense. Mess with someone when they're young and they're messed up for life, potentially.
Right. They say it straight up. Corrupting youth with, drugs, sex, all that. It weakens a nation long term. It's a long game, but it could work.
What about the military, though? They got to be seen as a problem for this psychopolitics. Do they talk about that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. They talk about getting operatives into the military. The goal is to control information, so there's no threat from the inside.
Control the information, control the story. It's starting to sound familiar. But if this whole thing is as big as they say, how do they keep it quiet? How come nobody notices?
And that's where this document gets really sneaky. They have a whole part about how to defend against people pushing back, people figuring them out. It's all about keeping up the act, so no one sees what they're doing.
So it's not enough to control the story. Got to shut down anyone who questions it, too.
Right. They say to discredit critics, call them paranoid, crazy, whatever works, make them lose credibility. And get this, they even say to make up evidence.
No way. Fake evidence to make themselves look good and their enemies look bad.
It's classic, right? Disinformation. And they're all for it. On top of that, controlling information is key. Anything that could expose them has to be buried or discredited.
So it's control the information, control the story, control the people. Effective, but ruthless. Gotta say, though, this does all sound kind of far-fetched, doesn't it?
That's the big question, isn't it? Some people think the whole manual is just really good Cold War propaganda made by L. Ron Hubbard himself.
Hold on, L. Ron Hubbard, the Scientology guy. But this manual is anti-Scientology.
That's the thing. And that's one of the big reasons people think it's propaganda. What better way to make your enemies look bad than to say they're into brainwashing?
Classic. Make up a fake enemy, blame them for everything, then you come in looking like the hero.
Exactly. And the Church of Scientology, they actually gave this manual out to people.
So they were using this fake manual to make their opponents look bad and make themselves look good.
Seems that way. But here's where it gets interesting. Even if it's all made up, it doesn't mean it's totally fake. A lot of the techniques, hypnosis, sleep deprivation, messing with people's minds with drugs, it's all real.
So they dressed it up as a brainwashing guide. But it could still be based on actual mind control stuff, maybe even stuff they were using in the Cold War.
Exactly. Remember, the US and the Soviet Union, they were both doing all sorts of secret research on how to mess with people's minds back then. Stuff like MKUltra, shows they were really into this stuff.
So maybe this manual isn't a step-by-step guide to brainwashing a whole country, but it could be a glimpse into the dark side of Cold War research and paranoia.
Exactly. It's a reminder that our minds aren't invincible. We can be manipulated, and there are always going to be people who want to do that for their own gain.
Which brings up another question. If it was meant to be propaganda, who were they trying to reach? The public? Or someone else entirely?
Yeah.
If it wasn't about brainwashing people, then who were they trying to influence? Who are they aiming at with all this?
Well, there are a couple of ideas floating around about that. One is that they wanted to freak people out, make everyone paranoid and suspicious, especially of the government.
Classic tactic, right? Divide and conquer. Turn everyone against each other so nobody can challenge the people in charge.
Exactly. Easier to control a bunch of people who don't trust each other. But there's another idea, and this one's interesting. Maybe they wrote this manual for, government officials, maybe even law enforcement.
Trying to convince them of what, though?
To make them see groups like Scientologists as a threat. That way, they could justify coming down hard on them, watching them more closely, all under the pretense of protecting everyone from this big, bad psychopolitical threat.
So they invented this whole thing, this fake manual, just so they could target their enemies and crack down on anyone who disagreed with them.
That's what some people believe. And the really crazy part is, it might actually worked. Even if the manual itself is totally made up, just putting it out there had real consequences. Scientologists, they were suddenly under a microscope, accused of brainwashing people left and right.
It just goes to show you a made-up story can still have a real impact, and it's not always a good one.
Absolutely. Makes you realize how important it is to be able to think critically about what you see and hear, especially these days when there's so much information out there, so much of it designed to mislead you.
So true, especially now. Okay, so we've talked about what the manual claims, the methods it describes, and how it might have been used as propaganda. But what does it all mean? What does this document tell us about power, control, the human mind, all of that?
The thing about Hubbard's brainwashing manual, real or fake, is that it taps into this primal fear we all have, the fear of losing control, of having our thoughts and actions manipulated without us even realizing it.
Like we're just puppets, yeah.
Exactly. And people in power, they use that fear all the time, whether they meant to or not. That's what this manual does. It lays out this whole system for manipulating people, a blueprint for how to control an individual or even a whole society. It's scary.
It makes you think about some uncomfortable stuff, about ourselves, the world we live in.
Makes you wonder, how much of what I think is really my own thought? How easy is it to influence me, to brainwash me? It's a lot to think about, especially in this day and age.
It really is. Constant information overload, social media feeding you the same stuff over and over, ads that seem to know you better than you know yourself.
Right. And if you take a step back, zoom out a little, I think Hubbard's brainwashing manual, fake or not, it's a warning. It reminds us that power, especially the power to control information, is dangerous if it's not kept in check. It reminds us that thinking critically isn't some intellectual exercise. It's how we navigate the world and stay true to ourselves.
So where does that leave us? What are the big takeaways, the things we should really hold on to from our look at Hubbard's brainwashing manual?
To me, it's realizing that our minds are both powerful and fragile. We can think for ourselves, analyze information, resist being controlled, but we're also vulnerable to fear, to going along with the crowd, to wanting easy answers in a complicated world.
A constant back and forth then, wanting to be free to think for ourselves, but also being open to influence from all sides.
That's it, exactly. Hubbard's brainwashing manual, it's a stark reminder of that struggle, whether it's a real document or a clever fake. And it reminds us we gotta stay alert, question everything, never underestimate the power of information to help us or to hurt us.
Which leads to one last question, and it's a big one. In a world where information is a weapon, where stories are crafted to change what we believe and how we act, how do we stay true to ourselves? How do we learn to think critically enough to navigate this landscape? That's all we have time for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
That's the challenge for all of us, and it's a challenge worth taking on if we want to hold on to our freedom of thought in a world that's trying harder and harder to take it away.